We will now commence with the daily routine. Presenting of and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to make an introduction before reading this resolution.
Granted.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, in the East Gallery this morning, we have Jennifer Jakimovich and her parents, Bill Jakimovich and Pam Sutherland, if you'd like to stand. Jennifer is a first-year student at Dalhousie University and the recipient of the $6,000 Dr. P. Anthony Johnstone Memorial Entrance Scholarship in 2011. Thank you, and I ask the House to give them a very warm welcome.
Thank you. We welcome all guests. We welcome all guests in the gallery today. We hope you enjoyed today's proceedings. I now recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jennifer Jakimovich began her studies at Dalhousie University this fall, working towards a Bachelor of Management with a focus on international development, and whereas Jennifer Jakimovich maintained a 95% average in grades 11 and 12, excelled in science, languages, the arts, and served as a student leader and role model for younger students. And whereas Jennifer Jakimovich traveled to India in February for a 3-month global Learning Across Borders program, where she learned firsthand about the cultures, traditions, and challenges facing the people with whom she lived, learned, and shared. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Jennifer Jakimovich on being selected as the 2011 recipient of the Dr. P. Anthony Johnstone Memorial Entrance Scholarship, awarded annually to a Nova Scotian scholar entering first-year studies at a maritime university, and commend Jennifer for all that she has accomplished so far and offer our best wishes for a successful future. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia's youngest residents and their families hold the key to a prosperous future for all Nova Scotians, and whereas all children have the right to live, learn, and play in safe and healthy environment, and whereas this year's National Child Day theme, the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health, supports the importance of providing children with the best start in life possible. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House be encouraged to take one of the blue ribbons provided in honour of the National Child Day that will be celebrated worldwide on November 20th. Madam Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism. Sorry, and African Affairs?
Yes.
Thank you.
African Nova Scotian Affairs.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of African and Nova Scotian Affairs.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Amelia Dahl Martin of Amherst was a prominent member of the African Nova Scotian community in Cumberland County, and the mother of Brian Martin, chairman of the Cumberland African Nova Scotia Association, and whereas Mrs. Martin was one of 6 women who shared her experiences in the 2005 documentary Weaving the Story, which celebrated the lives of African Nova Scotian women whose steadfast contributions to their families and communities had largely gone unrecognized. And whereas Mrs. Martin passed away on Tuesday, November the 8th, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly join me in extending condolences to the family and friends of Amelia Martin, who was one of Nova Scotia's many unsung heroes. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Sydney and Area Chamber of Commerce held its 2011 Excellence in Business Awards in October, and whereas the Stewardship Award, sponsored by the Sydney Sunshine Rotary Club, is presented to an organization to recognize their efforts and success in building sustainable communities, and whereas the Unama'ki Economic Benefits Office in Member 2 was the winner of the 2011 Stewardship Award in recognition of its success in establishment partnerships and its business-like approach to economic development. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly joins me in offering congratulations to the Unama'ki Economic Benefits Office, a unique economic partnership between the first 5 nation communities in Cape Breton that focuses on economic development, training, and support. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Introduction of bills. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the Minister responsible for Part 2 of the Gaming Control Act, I beg leave to introduce a bill and act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Gaming Control Act.
The Honourable Minister of Energy begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Gaming Control Act.
Bill number 104, an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Gaming Control Act.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. I recognize the Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I beg leave to introduce a bill on behalf of the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, an act to amend Chapter 475 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Trade Union Act.
The Honourable Member for Yarmouth begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 475 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Trade Union Act.
Bill number 105, entitled An Act to amend Chapter 475 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Trade Union Act.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. I recognize the Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I read this on behalf of the member from Annapolis. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Wednesday, November 16th, 2011, Canadians and indeed the world lost a truly outstanding physician, scientist, and most notably advocate for children with the passing of Dr. Fraser Mustard. And whereas Dr. Mustard's passion for early childhood development and the link to adult life, health, and wellness has inspired economists, educators, and governments around the world. And whereas Dr. Mustard is best known for his recommendations around parenting centers to support families, providing health services, preschool screening,
Parenting Resources and Child Care, which he co-authored with the Honourable Margaret Norrie McCain in their groundbreaking 1999 early years study. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House extend our condolences to Dr. Mustard's family and honour Dr. Mustard's passing by dedicating our collective attention to the importance of investing in early childhood development. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Orders of the... Oh, sorry. I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I begin my motion with an introduction?
You may.
Madam Speaker, seated in the West Gallery today is an important member of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Ms. Amelia DeMarco, and I would like you to extend her greetings on behalf of all members of the House.
I welcome her and all visitors in the gallery today.
Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas, with Nova Scotia's economy in a fragile state and entire industries are fighting for survival, it has never been more important for government to create the right climate for jobs. And whereas, despite the fact that the Labour and Management Review Committee was unable to reach a consensus on the first issue put before it, whereas the Premier promised to share with all Nova Scotians the results of the committee's work, even as the government moved past the committee and on with its own special interest plans. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge that this government is determined to jam through its special interest agenda that will discourage the very investment that would create jobs, and that the Labour Management Review Committee process is nothing more than a sham. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Hearing several noes, the motion is tabled. I recognize the Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Barb Stegman of Bedford is the founder of 7 Virtues, a fragrance line that provides employment to individuals in war-torn states like Afghanistan and Haiti, and whereas Barb Stegman was named as a finalist for Chatelaine Magazine's Top Entrepreneur of the Year award, and whereas these awards, presented in partnership with City TV, celebrate the many remarkable and inspiring women like Barb Stegman who are making changes big and small in their communities and in the world. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly applaud the accomplishments of Barb Stegman and her recognition by Chatelaine Magazine. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate. Thank you.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Kyle Capstick of Marion Bridge recently won 2nd place in the Playwrights Guild of Canada National Post-Secondary Playwriting Competition, and whereas Kyle received this prestigious award for his play, I Miss Not Just Your Eyes, and whereas Kyle began acting as a teenager with the UCCB Youth Drama Group and became serious about writing 2 years ago when his other play, All My Love, was produced at the Elizabeth Broadmoor One-Act Play Festival. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Kyle Capstick on winning the Playwrights Guild of Canada competition and wish him every success as he continues on in his future in the theatre. And, Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the iconic American fishing schooner, the Columbia, was launched in 1923 with the express intent to win the International Fisherman's Cup Race Championship from Nova Scotia's iconic schooner, the Bluenose, sank off the coast of Nova Scotia in 1927. And whereas the Eastern Shipbuilding Group in Florida currently is building a 140-foot replica of the Gloucester schooner, was looking for a company to supply the Columbia with spars, standing and running rigs, mast hoops, rig metal work, and sails. And whereas 5 local marine-based firms will be involved in the recreation of the Columbia involving Covey Island Boat Works, Michelle Stevens Sail Loft, A. Daphne and Sons, and LaHave Marine Woodworks and Standfast Fittings. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognizes the contribution of Covey Island Boat Works, Michelle Stevens Sail Loft, A. Daphne and Sons, LaHave Marine Woodwork, and Steadfast Fittings for their expertise in shipbuilding and their involvement in the reconstruction of Columbia Fishing Schooner. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hereby give notice on a future, Madam Speaker, sir, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas CBC Radio in Halifax recently held its competition, Main Street School of Rock, Fall 2011, a search for the best teen rock band in Nova Scotia. And whereas Yarmouth, the Rockabillys, a country rock band consisting of Yarmouth Consolidated Memorial High School students Alex Surratt, Spencer Muse, Matt Wilkinson, and Cameron Nickerson competed and advanced to the final round of CBC Radio's Main Street's School of Rock Fall 2011. And whereas on November 17th, after performing on CBC Nova Scotia Main Street in front of a live studio audience and contest judges, the Rockabillys won the Main Street School of Rock Fall 2011 competition and were named the best teen rock band in Nova Scotia. Therefore, be resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Rockabillys on this impressive and exciting accomplishment, wish them much future success, and thank them for their contributions to music in Yarmouth and beyond. Madam Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice. Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lieutenant Governor's Education Medal recognizes students' academic achievement, leadership, and service to school and community. And whereas in May 2011, Megan Laffin was awarded this prestigious award by Nova Scotia's Lieutenant Governor Mayanni Francis for her many achievements, including maintaining her honours with distinction status, and whereas Ms. Laffin has helped raise money for the Hants West Relay for Life, participated in previous Canadian Cancer Society walks, is a member of the ICE All-Stars cheerleading team, as well as the Evanview High School band program. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Megan on receiving the Lieutenant Governor's Education Medal and wish her all the best with her future endeavours. Madam Speaker, apologize. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madame la Présidente, par la présence, j'avise que je proposerai à une date ultérieure l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que l'industrie du bois a joué un rôle de premier plan dans l'économie rurale de la Baie-Sainte-Marie, et attendu que la famille Adjoa Rosalie Como de Bangor à la Baie-Sainte-Marie est reconnue pour son engagement dans l'exploitation saine de la forêt locale, et attendu que Denise Como des Hôtels, fille d'Émile Alphonse Adjoa Rosalie, a publié un livre qui nous a fait revivre la belle époque quand nos ancêtres travaillent fort dans la forêt et les moulins à scie. Qu'il soit résolu que les membres de cette Assemblée félicitent Madame Denise Como des Hôtels pour nous avoir offert une capsule historique de Bangor dans la municipalité de Clare, petit village acadien qui a joué un important rôle dans le secteur forestier de notre économie provinciale. Et Madame la Présidente, je propose l'adoption de résolution.
Order, please. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's difficult to hear. The chatter's getting too loud. The honourable member from Clare has the floor.
Madame la Présidente, je propose l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the lumber industry played a key role on the local Baie-Sainte-Marie economy, and whereas a well-known local family of Joe and Rosalie Como from Bangor in the municipality of Clare was engaged in sustainable operations in the forests and of sawmills, and whereas Madame Denise Como des Hôtels has published a book titled Bangor, Nouvelle-Écosse sur la rivière au fil du temps, depicting the lumbering and sawmills activities over the years. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Madame Denise Comeau-Desautel for writing a piece of local history that fits well into the picture of other rural communities in Nova Scotia engaged in the forest industry. And Madam Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Cape Breton author, Sherry Molly MacDonald, is using her own experience with breast cancer to educate others about the disease, and whereas she is donating all proceeds from her latest book, One Small Lump, Memoirs of a Breast Cancer Survivor, to the Cape Breton Cancer Centre, and whereas Sherry wants people to hear her story and to know that breast cancer can be beaten and that life can be the same, even better, after the diagnosis and treatment. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Sherry Molly MacDonald for her efforts to offer comfort and funding to make the battle against cancer easier for others, and wish her success in all her endeavours. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Greg McClellan graduated from Antigonish Regional High School, St. Francis Xavier University with a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Education, and St. Mary's University with a Master's in Education, and whereas Greg has spent his entire 33-year career at North Colchester High School in Tatamagouche, Colchester North, first as a classroom teacher and then as a principal. And whereas Greg retired in June 2011 and traveling abroad, renovating the family cottage and playing golf are part of his retirement plan, therefore be it resolved all members of the House of Assembly express our thanks to Greg for his 33 years of dedicated service as an educator and administrator and wish him healthy, happy retirement. Madam Speaker, I request waiver notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Before I recognize the next speaker, I would remind people again, members again, that the chatter in the House at this moment is very high. I don't want to interrupt those speaking, but if you have side conversations, perhaps you can take them outside. The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Susie Egar of Halifax has joined the team of doctors at Inverness Consolidated Memorial Hospital, and whereas Dr. Egar has close ties to Inverness County, spending 3 months each year at her parents' Marguerite Harbour summer home while completing her medical degree, and whereas the people of Inverness County will benefit from Dr. Egar's efforts to help them enjoy healthier lifestyles. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly welcome Dr. Susie Egar and wish her a fulfilling career at Inverness Consolidated Memorial Hospital. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 7th annual Martel Richard Memorial Mini Marathon took place September 24, 2011 in Arishat. Whereas participants of the mini marathon had a choice to walk 5 kilometers, run 5 kilometers, or run 10 kilometers. And whereas I ran 5 kilometers. And whereas in the men's 10-kilometer run category, Kenny Maxwell finished first place, Simon Pettipaw finished second place, and David George finished third place. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Kenny Maxwell, Simon Pettipaw, and David George on finishing in the top 3 in the men's 10-kilometer run category at the Martel Richard Memorial Mini Marathon. And Madam Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Peter and Candice Cristiano of Pinewood Flooring and Lumber Limited, Middle River, were selected as regional winners of the Nova Scotia Woodlot Owner of the Year Award, and whereas Peter and Candice's 75-acre woodlot is predominantly hardwood that has been managed for the past 30 years to increase quality improvement using a method called uneven age management. And whereas Peter and Candice have been recognized for this method, as well as their stewardship of their woodlots that preserves and prepares for longevity of the industry, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly extend their congratulations to Peter and Candice Cristiano for their contribution to the forest industry and wish them great success in the future. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, with concurrence, the House could ask for to revert the order to presenting reports of committees.
Agreed. Is it agreed? Agreed. Presenting reports of committees. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As Chair of the Committee on Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has made and considered the following bills: Bill number 73, number 76, number 78, number 80, number 84, and number 85. The committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House without amendments.
The report is tabled. We'll revert back to... I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As Chair of the Committee of the Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bill. Bill number 65. The committee recommends this bill to a favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
The report is tabled. I order that these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. We'll now revert back to notices of motion. I recognize the Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Chignecto Central Regional School Board's transportation fleet and staff were evaluated by the Nova Scotia Department of Education and the Motor Carrier Division of the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, and whereas the review included training, accident reporting and frequency, maintenance programs, stops per mile and passenger loads, trip inspection and hours of work, garage cleanliness and safety practices, bus cleanliness and appearance, and whereas Chignecto Central Regional School Board operates more than 200 buses on more than 540 routes, the Transportation Department has 250 bus drivers, 19 mechanics, and 7 supervisory staff who help transport 17,000 students daily. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Chignecto Central Regional School Board's Transportation Department for receiving a Provincial Gold Achievement Award for the 14th consecutive year. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Marion Bridge Elementary School recently participated in the Adopt a Library WOW Reading Challenge, a program delivered by Nova Scotia's public libraries, the RCMP, communities, business, and police agencies that encourage a love of reading in school-age children. And whereas the school won a banner for 4th place in the province and a trophy and banner for 1st place in the small schools category. And whereas, with students and staff reading over 16,000 books, Marion Bridge Elementary School was also the 1st place school in the Cape Breton Victoria School Board. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate all the students and staff from Marion Bridge Elementary School on their impressive performance in the Adopt a Library WOW Reading Challenge and wish them many happy hours of reading in the future. And Madam Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Communities in Bloom recently released its 2011 national results, and whereas the town of Yarmouth is a national finalist in the 7,500 to 10,000 population category, and whereas the town of Yarmouth also received a 5 Blooms rating and a special mention for its 250th anniversary celebrations as a community. Therefore, be resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate the town of Yarmouth on these prestigious honours from Communities in Bloom and recognize the town of Yarmouth for its strong community heritage. Madam Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Again, before I recognize the next speaker, forgive me, but I can give a little leeway for the Madam Speaker and Mr. Speaker, but Madam Chair, it just work hard. I would encourage you to work hard to correct that one. It's been occurring, and I think it's just a matter of respect. Thank you very much. I recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Speaker, you almost confused me. I had it right the first time. Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the following resolution. Whereas over 40,000 student athletes participate annually in school sport programs throughout the province. And whereas the Nova Scotia Schools Athletic Federation annually organizes the celebration of school sport to celebrate participation, fair play in school and service to school sport, and to reinforce the significant role interscholastic athletics plays in education. And whereas Shane O'Reilly, a student at Evanview High School in Windsor, was the male recipient of the Celebration of School Sport 2010-2011 award for demonstrating respect for others and displaying a true example of good sportsmanship. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Shane on receiving this award and wish him all the best. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 7th annual Martel Richard Memorial Mini Marathon took place September 24, 2011 in Arishat, and whereas participants of the mini marathon had a choice to walk 5 kilometers, run 5 kilometers, or run 10 kilometers, and whereas in the women's 10-kilometer run category, Angèle Richard finished first place, Jessica Boudreau finished second place, and Louise Petitpas finished third place. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Angèle Richard, Jessica Boudreau, and Louise Petitpas on finishing in the top 3 in the women's 10-kilometer run category at the Martel Richard Memorial Mini Marathon. Madam Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in August, 14 finalists competed for the title of Miss Teen Cape Breton 2011 in Sydney. And whereas contestants were judged on personal interview, formal wear, charitable activities, community engagement, and scholastic achievements. And whereas Miss Teen North Sydney, Emma Simpson, was awarded the title of Miss Fitness based on her proven track record of athletic ability, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Emma Simpson, Miss Fitness, in the Miss Teen Cape Breton 2011 scholarship pageant and wish her well in her future endeavours. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the, or Madam Speaker, I move the adoption of the following resolution. I saw that smile.
She wasn't here for the lesson.
I'm sorry. Whereas Evan K. Finney, a grade 12 student at Sacred Heart School of Halifax and Halifax Clayton Park resident, has been riding with the Halifax Junior Bengal Lancers for 12 years. And whereas Evan was named Athlete of the Week by the Chronicle Herald after she placed 3rd and won an individual bronze medal in the jumper division competing on her horse, Duke of Earl, at the inaugural Canadian Equestrian Championships at the Bromont Equestrian Olympic Park in Bromont, Quebec in September 2011. And whereas Evan was one of the 8 team members of Team Nova Scotia and a member of the Nova Scotia jumper team and made our province proud by winning a team bronze medal in the jumper division and by contributing to Team Nova Scotia's finishing 3rd overall in the provincial standings for a bronze medal at the 2011 Canadian Equestrian Championships. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House of Assembly join me in congratulating Evan K. Finney with her horse Duke of Earl and her Nova Scotia teammates for their successes at the Canadian Equestrian Championships and wish them all the best in their future endeavours and competitions. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Madam Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dino's Convenience and Camping, located half a kilometre south of Ingonish on the Cabot Trail, is a family-owned business operated by Edward and Teresa Hardy. And whereas Dino's has a total of 16 campsites and is also a spot where you can purchase delicious baked goods. And whereas Dino's Convenience and Camping is a well-established, having operated in the Ingonish area since 1971. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Edward and Teresa Hardy for their entrepreneurial spirit and wish them continued success. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development on a statement to the House.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Although I wasn't in the House at the time, but I understand that there was mentioning in the House, I think it was on Tuesday, as a result of something that I said during question period. A point of order was raised in this House. And I want to say this, Madam Chair, because of who I am, Madam Speaker, my apologies, because of who I am and because I'm a strong practitioner in diversity, I would ask that I would retract the statement that the complaint of. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The statements are retracted. Orders of the day. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could you please call government bills for second reading?
Government bills for second reading.
Could you please call Bill 102, the Trade Union Act?
I now call Bill number 102, the Trade Union Act. I now recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education to move second reading.
Madam Speaker, I move that Bill 102, an act to prevent unnecessary labour disruptions and protect the economy, be now read a second time. Madam Speaker, it is my privilege to rise and speak on this bill, which contains amendments to the Trade Union Act. Madam Speaker, government's goal is to preserve the stable labour relations environment we enjoy in Nova Scotia. We want to make it easier for employers, employees, and unions to resolve their differences in a mature and responsible manner. This legislation deals with the difficult task of creating a first collective agreement, and it creates incentive for parties to reach a collective agreement on their own. In the rare event that they cannot, this legislation allows for a third party to resolve any outstanding issues in the dispute, avoiding a prolonged lockout or strike. There are very few situations, 2 or 3 a year in the run of a year in Nova Scotia, where negotiators aren't able to conclude a first agreement on their own. Madam Speaker, first contract settlement is a topic with a broad range of views and perspectives, and I am comfortable that we have heard them. The Labour Management Review Committee conducted broad consultation on this subject. In the end, the committee could not reach a consensus, but they did provide me and my staff with valuable input. I personally met with business and labor representatives to discuss first contract settlement. There was a clear difference of opinion. We have listened to business, have incorporated an educational component in this legislation. It takes place within 2 weeks of a union being certified. A provincial conciliator will provide information and awareness to both the employer and the union about negotiating a collective agreement. This increases the likelihood of successfully reaching a first contract. Madam Speaker, first contract settlement has existed in Canada for 37 years. It is good public policy that has been brought in by governments of all political stripes. In 1978, Premier René Lévesque and his PQ government adopted first contract settlement in Quebec. The same year, the federal government adopted it under Liberal Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Another Liberal Premier, David Peterson, adopted it in Ontario in 1986. Conservative Premier Brian Peckford instituted first contract settlement in Newfoundland and Labrador in 1985, and it remained in place ever since, including under Premier Danny Williams. Madam Speaker, 6 provinces and the federal government have such legislation in place. 85% of the Canadian workforce is already covered by such legislation. Research clearly reveals no major problems as a result of first contract legislation. In fact, the legislation is rarely used because most negotiations result in a voluntary agreement. Madam Speaker, if that's the case in most of Canada, why are some people insisting it will be different in Nova Scotia? We have a good labour environment in Nova Scotia, and there's no big strike or other labour crisis at hand. We don't want to wait until there is a crisis and then wish we had been more proactive. Hear, hear. Madam Speaker, the intent of this bill is simple enough. It's there to prevent unnecessary, costly strikes in newly unionized workplaces that would hurt businesses, workers, and the economy. The bill only applies to workplaces that are already unionized and have no collective agreement in place. Madam Speaker, this bill is sensible, pragmatic policy that is commonplace across the country. Catching up with first contract law is the right thing to do, and now is the right time. Madam Speaker, that concludes my remarks, and I look forward to hearing from the members opposite. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a, it is important that all of us get a chance to stand up and speak on this bill because it is an important one. And to speak frankly, the members of this caucus aren't sure precisely why it's being brought forward at this time, because it doesn't seem to be addressing a problem that we currently have in our system, and it's doing nothing to address the real problem we have with job losses in the province. This province, since this government has taken over, has lost 12,500 jobs. I realize the minister says we don't want to act, be crisis-driven and act, but I would suggest that we are on the verge of a job loss crisis here, and now is the time to act in the interest of our employers, in the interest of business in the province, to prevent that. Now, I'm not going to, I won't stand up and suggest what the leader of the third party said, that this is part of some sinister job-killing plot. Or scheme, because I don't think that's the case. I don't think there's numbers that would suggest that this is going to kill thousands of jobs in the province. But there's also not the evidence to suggest that this act is what it says it is to protect the economy. Because what's happening is that employers, the business people, the job creators in this province are saying, this makes us nervous. This makes us nervous. And this is the second time in this House that we've had a government move forward with labor bills or acts that is counter to what the business community is asking for. And I'm asking at a time when we've lost 12,500 jobs in this province under this government, when we need to ensure that there's confidence amongst our employers and business people, that they believe in the government, that they believe in the power of the province, that they believe in investing in Nova Scotia at a time when we need that to happen so that we don't lose more jobs, why do we continue to move forward with legislation that creates concern with those job creators? Why do we do that? This happened with Bill 100. This happened with Bill 100. It was quickly brought through. We were told that it was a small matter, nothing to worry about. And lo and behold, businesses across the province are saying, wait a second, what is this? This isn't helping us. This isn't helping us create jobs. This isn't helping our business. And why is this happening again with this? I mean, I think the obvious answer is that the agenda is being driven by certain union organizers that are involved in a partisan way with the government. I don't think anyone can hide from that. You know, I think that's the case. That's the case because no one else in the business community is asking for this. And instead of tackling those real issues that we have in this province, job losses, the fact that we have the most uncompetitive tax structure in the country, we're the highest tax jurisdiction, instead of addressing those real concerns, this government continues to move forward with legislation that actually worries our employers and our business people. Let's look at the decisions this government has made. One decision that the Minister of Finance was actually a bit apologetic for when he came to Yarmouth was the Yarmouth Ferry. He said perhaps, and I can bring the article in if the Minister of Finance would like, Madam Chair. And we're talking about business here. This is about the economy. The title of this bill is protecting the economy, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Look at the decisions that have been made by this government when it comes to protecting the economy. Let's look at them. What have they been? They've been doing the opposite. They've been creating fear in our business people and our employers. You know, and some members may say that the opposition parties are creating fear. We're not. We're presenting rational arguments that are being echoed by the private sector. And if the member from Guysborough Sheet Harbour ever took the time to actually meet with those stakeholders that we've been meeting with, the retailers, the small business owners, the independent businesses, the chambers of commerce, all those representatives of the business sector in this province that are the ones creating jobs, that are ones ensuring that Halifax does better, perhaps he would have a different opinion on this.
They'll just whisper from the back.
Perhaps he would. Because the fact of the matter is we are losing jobs under this government. That's the fact, according to Statistics Canada. And instead of tackling the real issues that we have in this province, our uncompetitive tax structure being one of them, we're moving forward with bills that actually create more concern from our businesses, big businesses. And to have a Minister of Economic and Rural Development stand up in the House and say, well, we're losing jobs because of other factors that aren't related to this government, I think is a scary thing.
Hear, hear.
It's a scary thing. It's a scary thing when a government consistently blames everybody else for the problems that we're facing in this province. We have consistently members of this government stand up in the House and blame a government from when I was 10 and 12 years old. They blame the previous government for their inactivity on the economy and then rebrand a lot of the previous government's plans and their Jobs Where program. We have a government that stands up and blames Italy, that blames Greece, that blames everybody else for the current state of affairs in this province, but does not take responsibility themselves.
And boast about our export numbers.
And to have a minister stand up in this House and say that it is not my responsibility. It's not my responsibility to support the economy of Nova Scotia. It's not my responsibility to help job creation. It's not my fault we're losing jobs. That's a scary thing because that sends very clear messages to our employers and to business. One, the government doesn't have control. Two, that Nova Scotia is a risky place to do business in. When you have a minister that stands up and says, this isn't my problem, this isn't my fault, those are the messages that are sent out. The government does not have control, and Nova Scotia is a risky place to invest in. Those are the messages that that minister sends out every time he says that.
Good message.
When in fact, the opposite is true. Governments do have a very important role to play when it comes to job creation in the state of our economy. A very clear and important role to create the conditions for success, to ensure that this province is competitive as a whole, to invest in areas like transportation that brings people and business to this province and through it. Transportation links like the Yarmouth Ferry, which connected this province to the largest market in the world.
That's right.
The connection to Nova Scotia, the largest market in the world, was cut by this government, and we've seen the negative consequences as a result of that. The government has a role to do that. And Madam Speaker, this government also has a responsibility to look at our tax structure and to actually make decisions that strengthen it, that make it more fair, that make our province more competitive. And instead of moving on these things, this government brings forward bills that don't help create jobs, but that are what their partisan allies who advertise for them in elections, do third-party advertising for them in elections, are asking for. And right now, at a time when this province is losing jobs, thousands of them, under this government, it's not the time to listen to our partisan allies. It's time to listen to our business community.
That's right. Here, here.
It's time to listen to our business community, the job creators in this province. If the Minister of Economic and Rural Development says he can't create jobs, then maybe he can help those people that are in our province do just that. And let's look at some of the economic numbers. At 1.9%, Nova Scotia has the worst growth of any provincial economy in the country.
Congratulations.
The worst right now.
Congratulations.
And yet, despite this fact, despite the fact we're losing thousands of jobs, this government will stand up and boast about bills that aren't helping with job creation. They'll yell us down when we bring up these concerns. These aren't the concerns of Liberals. These are the concerns of Nova Scotians. These are concerns of the business people in Yarmouth that are now out of business. We just had another business in Yarmouth that announced they'll be closing soon. A golf store. Another one. And the state of our economy in rural Nova Scotia is in a difficult position right now. In the past year, Cape Breton lost 2,100 jobs. Does first contract arbitration put those people back to work?
They can get them from
This last year, the North Shore region lost 1,400 jobs. Does first contract arbitration put those people back to work?
Yeah, if it's in
The Valley region lost 600 jobs in this past year alone. Does first contract arbitration put those people back to work?
Yeah, if it's in Fort McMurray.
Southern region, where I'm from, 2,500 jobs lost in this past year. My question to the Minister of Labour, my question to the Minister of Finance, my question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development, my question to this government is, does first contract arbitration put those people back to work?
Yes, if it's in Grand Prairie.
Does it? In the past, and this is the point. We talk about protecting the environment in this act, Madam Speaker, but there's nothing in this act that protect the economy in this act. There's nothing in this act that protects our economy. There's nothing in this act that fosters job creation. There's nothing in this act that supports our business owners, our employers, the job creators in the province. There's nothing in this act Madam Speaker, I'll be clear. Without employers in this province, without business owners, there are no employees.
That's right.
There are no employees. There are no employees, Madam Chair. Without employers, without business owners, there are no employees.
Dave, you're off to a
And
good
that's
start.
something that
You're
this government continues to forget.
The honourable member for Yarmouth has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that's something that I think we all need to take note of. Without our employers, without the job creators, without the business owners, small and large, without our entrepreneurs, who have all voiced concern over this bill and the previous Labour bill, Bill 100, there aren't employees in Nova Scotia. And that's what's happening. That's why we're losing jobs. 12,500 jobs lost. And the members opposite can laugh it off, shrug it off, rub a little dirt off their shoulder, but that's the truth. 12,500 jobs lost under this government and this Minister of Finance. And you know what? You know what I find very offensive, Madam Chair, is that instead of paying attention to those real issues, instead of listening to business owners, instead of listening to the retailers, to the people creating jobs, this Minister of Finance chooses not to do that. And instead of bringing forward an economic development plan that is actually going to help this province, what does this Minister of Finance do? Rebrands the old political slush fund that he said was a bad thing previously. Not only rebrands it, puts more money into it. Is that his economic development plan? The identical expansion fund, one that Minister of Finance said is a political slush fund. What does he do when he's in office? He increases it by $75 million. And he calls that protecting the environment. Give me a break. It's a joke. And what we've seen consistently time and time again is that these cabinet ministers, when they are in opposition, said very
Order. Order. Sit down. Sit down. I realize the week has been long. We have much to do in this House. Every member has the right to have their time in their debate. I now recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and I apologize for the Madam Chair comment. Usually you are the Madam Chair when we're talking about these bills in committees. So I apologize for that. I didn't mean any offense. And you know, at a time when Nova Scotians are feeling a real economic pinch, we bring forward bills that say we're protecting the economy, we're protecting jobs, but they're not. They're doing the very opposite. They're doing the very opposite because at a time when we're losing jobs, when we're losing confidence here, this government brings forward bills that actually increases that uncertainty. And I'm not sure why that happens. We have not had any legislation that's been brought forward that actually addresses the fundamental economic challenge that we have here in this province, and that is our taxes. The fundamental challenge we have in our province is our taxes. The member from Upper Sackville, Hamas Plains always asks, what would you do? We have said very clearly what we would do to strengthen our economy. We would create a comprehensive review of our tax system in an attempt to make it fairer, to make it more just, and to make this province more competitive. And instead of moving forward on something like that,
just start by raising.
instead of moving forward on something like that, they'll actually, for the long term, help this province do better. We move forward on bills that say we're protecting the economy, but all we're doing is supporting some very specific union leaders that have asked for this.
That's right.
And what problem are we trying to fix? That's a question that our leader has asked several times. What is the problem that we're trying to fix? What is it? What is it? I think every piece of legislation we bring in here should be attacking the challenges that Nova Scotians are facing each and every day. That's what legislation should do in this House.
That's right.
We should be identifying the challenges, the problems, identifying potential solutions, and bringing forward legislation that leads us towards those. That's what we need to be doing in this House. Talking about legislation that matters.
Right.
Not saying we're protecting the economy when we're bringing in legislation that creates uncertainty in the business place.
That's right.
That's not protecting our economy. And the member from Guysborough Sheet Harbour can shake his head all he wants. But again, I will ask him to chat and consult with those members of our business community that continually bring forward these concerns, that did it before and that are doing it now.
I guess you do.
And not only will I ask that he consult with them, I ask that he listen with an open mind and an objective mind. Because, Madam Speaker, we can all be proven wrong at one point or another. And I'm not here saying, like the third party, is this is a job killer. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, as the member from Pictou East. I'm not doing what he would suggest, what he says some of us do, and creating a sense of doom and gloom here. I'm not doing that. What we're doing is we're having a very real conversation about what this bill is and why it was brought forward. And we're talking about consultation here, and I do have questions about the level of consultation. The comments from the public that were supposed to be in on this act came in November 4th. The minister, post those comments coming in, was supposed to consult with the board, consider the comments, and bring forward recommendations. And what we have is I think, the same thing that we started out with. And that's a very quick turnaround to do all those things, to consult with the board, read all the comments that came in, and make recommendations. That happened in what? Less than 2 weeks? And the board was even divided on this. The board was even divided on this. I think it's very unfair for the members opposite to suggest that the concerns we're bringing forward are somehow misplaced, or that we're trying to create fear for no reason. The board, the Labour board, was divided on this issue. Right? It's not just this House that's divided. The Labour board was divided. Now, and it looks that, if you look at the amount of time, Madam Speaker, that it took for the minister to bring forward this bill, they responded quicker to this than they did the Auditor General's report. Quicker than the Auditor General's report. Why? Perhaps it's because the decision was already made. I don't know. And let's look at the reasons for doing this.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education on point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to clarify that the advisory committee is the Labour Management Advisory Committee. It's not the Labour Board. That's a very completely different board, and I think for the sake of both the further discussion and comments, we should be clear that the Labour Board is not implicated at all in giving advice to the minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That would not be a point of order. I recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
And I do want to thank the minister for making that point clear to me. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. So the LMRC was divided on it, right? The LMRC was divided on it. A different group was divided on it. And when we come back to that question, what problems are we trying to fix here? I think it's a very real question. This caucus unequivocally supports the principles of collective bargaining. Unequivocally. We support the rights of employers and employees to work together and negotiate to reach agreements. We support that. And the preamble of the Trade Union Act outlines the importance of free collective bargaining. And it is the belief of this caucus that perhaps first contract arbitration actually negates the nature of collective bargaining in Nova Scotia. True collective bargaining allows for an exchange of information about the business climate, etc. First contract arbitration can actually preempt this exchange, this vital exchange, where employers and employees come together and say, this is what I'm able to do, this is what we want, can we find an agreement that's fair for us, fair for all parties, and that makes sense in the marketplace. This legislation could perhaps preempt that very important process, because one side says, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to engage in that very meaningful conversation about the climate that we're working in, about what we're each able to do. And this could preempt that. I'll allow an introduction, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance on an introduction.
Thank you very much to the member for allowing an introduction. I'd like to draw the attention of the House in the East Gallery to a distinguished visitor we have with us. We have Mr. Wes Sheridan, the Minister of Finance, Energy and Municipal Affairs from Prince Edward Island. And he is joined by his brother-in-law, Tim Thompson, who has made the very sensible decision recently of moving back to the Maritimes. And we welcome both of our visitors.
Thank you. I welcome all guests to the gallery. I hope you enjoyed today's proceedings. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And welcome to everybody in the gallery. It's true. You know, back to the question, what problem are we trying to fix? And does this bill, we've already seen it doesn't protect the economy. But at a more basic level, does this actually improve the collective bargaining process in the province? Our suggestion is it may not. Because, as I mentioned before, the collective bargaining process is a process by which the employers and employees come together, take into consideration the economic climate they're working in, look at each other's needs, wants, demands, and hopefully are able to reach an agreement that works for all parties and that's fair for all parties. This legislation could negate that very important and meaningful dialogue. And it could put allow one group to actually bypass that important process. Because under the current legislation, if there is an impasse in labor negotiations, party can request a conciliator. If that fails, they can request a mediator. If that fails, they can request an industry panel review. This is under the current legislation. But under FCA, employers can actually lose their right to a collective agreement. Employees who are in a certified union lose their right to a secret ballot vote to ratify a collective agreement. FCA places the responsibility of coming to a decision on a first contract squarely in the hands of a third party who has no vested interest in what's going on. And I think we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. Is that what we want collective bargaining to potentially look like in the province? You know, I realize that there can be sometimes, rarely in Nova Scotia, I don't even think it happens often. There have been strikes, I think, but it rarely happens. But isn't that in the right of employees to do? To have a strike if they're not getting what they need? Isn't it the right of an employer to have a lockout if they're not getting anywhere in that process? You know, this process could take away their rights to do that and put it squarely in the hands of a third party that has no vested interest, that doesn't necessarily address this issue comprehensively, as an arbitrator would do. Because as we were told in the technical briefing, an arbitrator comes forward with a very complete plan from an objective standpoint. It's arbitrary. That's why they're called an arbitrator. This could change that. First contract guarantees that the two parties are not under the same pressure to reach an agreement through free collective bargaining, because one party, it only takes one party to ask for this, and then we're there. So instead of the regular process, parties will be bound by a collective agreement being imposed on them by the Labor Board. This is an imposed contract by a third party who does not understand the realities, potentially, of business, the region, economic pressures faced by business. You know, is that what we want to do? The collective agreement process allows for those factors to be considered. Are we moving into an arena where those factors will no longer be considered by a third party? Because as we were told in the technical briefing of this, the work that the Labor Board does in reaching first contract arbitration is not as complete as the work that an arbitrator does in bringing those two parties together with a decision. All the things out there aren't necessarily considered. That's what we were told in technical briefing. And these are real questions that we have about the collective bargaining process. And at some point, it would be great if these concerns could be answered by the government. But I will reiterate, these just aren't the concerns of your opposition parties here. These are concerns that were brought forward by every single organization representing employers and business in the province. Every single one of them. The people that are actually creating jobs in the province, despite the difficult economic climate here. All of those people, every one of them representing those groups, has said, we're worried about this. Big companies like Michelin. Michelin employs 3,500 people in this province. Michelin said this legislation could impact future investment in the province of Nova Scotia. Is that what we want our business leaders to be telling other potential investors? Other potential entrepreneurs, other potential business people? We want our businesses in Nova Scotia saying, you know what, our government listens to us. Our government moves on legislation that makes our province competitive. And we want more people to come here. We want to invest more money in here. That's what we want our business people saying. We don't want them saying this could impact future investment. Because then what does Michelin say? They go tell the next big manufacturer, don't go to Nova Scotia. Don't go to Nova Scotia. And these are real consequences to moving forward with these labor bills. It happened before. Bill 100. I received countless emails and calls about Bill 100 from business owners across the province. Local business owners in Yarmouth. Our caucus received calls from businesses in other parts of the province. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Chambers of Commerce, everybody came forward on Bill 100 and said, let's hold up on this. There's some questions that need to be answered. And the Labor Management Review Committee that was created through Bill 100, it was assured to all those concerned business owners that we're only going to be dealing with unionized shops. That's who we're going to be dealing with. We're going to be dealing with unionized shops. The first thing they do is bring forward legislation, or some of them anyway, suggest legislation that affects non-unionized places of work. Why? What's the problem we're trying to fix? You know, if the minister or the government can stand up and say, this is precisely the problem that we're trying to fix. This is how it's going to fix it. Then let's hear it. We haven't heard that yet. All we've heard is concerns from the business community about this. Very serious, adamant concerns from big employers like Michelin. You know, if we're not listening to Michelin, who are we listening to here? Who are we listening to here? Who are we listening to if we're not listening to Michelin? And, you know, as I mentioned before, the facts are out there, Madam Chair, because every single representative, Madam Speaker, sorry, every single business representative in this province from the organizations that represent our employers has said, this creates uncertainty for us. So if any minister needs those facts, needs those comments, they're on a wonderful thing called the internet. And in a wonderful thing called the Chronicle Herald, and in other papers across the province, and on TV when these business owners talk about these things. So if you need any more evidence that's on the record, feel free to watch the news at night. Because at a time when we need to be acting in this chamber together to stem the bleeding of jobs in Nova Scotia, to bring forward legislation that makes the province more competitive, which makes us more appealing to outside businesses to come in, which creates jobs in rural areas like the Valley, the South Shore, Cape Breton, the North Shore. When we need to be doing those things, instead, this government brings forward bills that potentially works against the goals of creating more jobs here. And as I mentioned before, members of this government can stand up and shirk that responsibility that they have for creating jobs for people in Nova Scotia and creating confidence here. But I assure them, Madam Speaker, it is squarely on their shoulders. And with those few comments, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Victoria, the Lakes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to rise as the critic for Labour and Advanced Education for the PC Party to speak on this bill concerning first contract arbitration. But I can't help but wonder, why is this bill even before us? One of the biggest questions we have around this legislation is simply why? Why now? Why first contract arbitration, or better called first contract imposition? Madam Speaker, I've never once had a constituent come to me in my office and tell me that Nova Scotia needed first contract legislation. And from talking to my colleagues, I know it hasn't been a burning issue in their constituencies either. I'd like to ask the members of the opposite, how many of your constituents have come to you and said, if there's anything government can do during the fall sitting of the legislature, it should be to introduce first contract arbitration?
None.
I'm not getting answers, so I guess that pretty much tells you.
That must mean none.
So, Madam Speaker, that begs the question, who is pressuring the government to act on this?
Good question.
Where is the desire for first contract legislation coming from?
It's got to be Leonard.
It certainly hasn't been a public demand. There have been no loud calls from what I've heard. Madam Speaker, it's clear that this is a government that puts special interests ahead of public interest. And we shouldn't be surprised by this. We've seen it before. We all remember Bill 100.
Oh, yeah.
Bill 100, another extreme piece of anti-business legislation that puts special interests ahead of public interest. Remember the small businesses, Madam Speaker, that lined up and pleaded with government not to move ahead with their extreme labour agenda? Well, the government bullied ahead anyway. And now we see the same thing is happening here. Between this experience, the Bill 100 experience, and countless other instances, I think it's now crystal clear that this government is, quite simply put, anti-business.
That's right.
They're committed to destroying the private sector here in Nova Scotia. And make no mistake about it, Madam Speaker, that's what they're doing. And that's what this bill can do. It can destroy the private sector here in Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, some time ago, we spent many hours in this legislature discussing Bill 100 that set up the Labour Management Review Committee. At this time, Madam Speaker, I'd like to read the mandate of that committee. It says that Section 139 of the Labour Board Act establishes a Labour Management Review Committee to review, report on, and make recommendations to the Minister on labour relations issues arising out of the Civil Service Collective Bargaining Act, Schedule A of the Corrections Act, the Highway Workers Collective Bargaining Act, and the Trade Union Act on an ongoing basis. Talks about the makeup of the committee, and then goes on to say the committee will consult with unionized employers and employees on issues relating to those acts. As well, the Minister may consult directly with the public, including non-unionized employers and employees, in relation to labour issues that affect non-unionized employers and employees. And I'll table that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when that committee was set up, there was concern expressed about the makeup of the committee, and that the fact that it would consult with unionized employers and employees on issues relating to the acts that I mentioned. Madam Speaker, small business wasn't listened to at that time, and they aren't being listened to now. The Minister, in her opening remarks, said that all sectors were consulted. I think it's important that the members of this legislature know that the honourable member from Inverness, as a representative of the PC caucus, planned on attending the sessions to observe, but was told he wasn't allowed in. Madam Speaker, the ironic part is one of the reasons he was told that he wasn't allowed in was because there wasn't enough lunch. So there's something wrong with that whole system. Madam Speaker, I know the member from Inverness has a very big appetite, but I think a cup of tea and maybe some half a sandwich or something, he might have been quite happy. But you imagine being told you're not allowed in, and one of the reasons is we don't have enough lunch. That's a very good reason.
What kind of consultation is that?
Madam Speaker, getting back to the recommendations, the minister asked from the Labour Management Review Committee. I want to make reference to a letter that the minister tabled on November 17th in this House. And it's from the two co-chairs of the Labour Management Review Committee. Madam Speaker, the letter says, "This is to inform you that the Labour Management Review Committee met on November 7th, 2011, to conclude a process of stakeholder consultation," the one that the honourable member wasn't allowed in, "and committee consideration on the issue of first contract settlement in the Nova Scotia context. After some very engaging and productive discussion, the Labour Management Review Committee has been unable to reach a consensus on whether first contract arbitration should be available under the Nova Scotia Trade Union Act." And it's signed sincerely by the two co-chairs. I know it's been tabled, but Madam Chair, I will retable it again. Madam Speaker, the committee couldn't reach consensus, but still, this government is determined to plough ahead with no one's blessing but their own. Madam Speaker, I mentioned before that the measures being taken by this government are destroying small private business in this province. And you don't have to take my word for it, but first contract arbitration can do. There are examples of this very thing happening in other jurisdictions that have imposed first contract arbitration. I'd like to take a few moments and talk about the devastating effect first contract imposition had on Treats, a franchise coffee and snack shop in Saskatchewan. Now, Treats operated on a university campus and mostly employed students on a part-time basis. And we all know about the challenges many students face in finding work during their studies. Any business that makes a point of employing them and engaging them in the economic fabric should be commended. I think that's something that all members of this House will agree with. In the case of Treats, the Canadian Union of Public Employees was certified as the bargaining agent. The bargaining of their agreement went on until only wage and monetary issues were resolved. At that point, the employer made it known he simply couldn't pay higher wages. The losses would be too great, and he wouldn't be able to make ends meet. The business would close, and the students would be out of work. Unfortunately, that wasn't good enough for CUPE. The union pushed back and demanded the employees at Treats be paid the same wage as the university's unionized cafeteria employees. Now, let's not forget, Treats was a small business that happened to be facing the same challenges that we all know small businesses are familiar with. Many small businesses simply can't afford to pay union wages. In many cases, it means their businesses close, the employees are left out of work, and families are left struggling.
And that's why the NDP wants to get rid of those businesses.
Madam Speaker, while Treats and the bargaining agent remained at odds, the Labour Board intervened. and imposed a first contract agreement that increased the workers' wages by almost 31%. Madam Speaker, that's almost a third. Making matters worse, Madam Speaker, even though the Labour Board took 14 months to reach their decision, much longer than the 45 days laid out in the province's legislation, they made the increases retroactive. And additionally, it required Treats to find and pay the increases to all of its ex-employees as well. Think about it. Treats did try to fight back because they knew their business was on the line. They took the decision to court, incurring legal fees, but the Saskatchewan Court of Queen's Bench upheld the board's decision in spite of the fact that the employers produced evidence proving they consistently lost money already and could not afford to pay higher wages. During the 14-month ordeal, Madam Speaker, the employers at Treats simply acknowledged that they could no longer make ends meet with the first contract imposed on them and ended up having to sell the business. That, Madam Speaker, is the kind of devastating impact first contract arbitration can have on an economy. Imagine, Madam Speaker, if we had first contract arbitration in Nova Scotia. All of us, every one of us, all 52 of us in this House, know of small businesses in our own constituency who would be forced into submission the same way the employers of Treats were due to the first contract arbitration. So, Madam Speaker, I urge the members on the government side to stop and consider the impact this would have on the small businesses in your constituencies. Stop and think about it. But it's more than just the businesses. Think about the people who depend on these business successes for their own income. We know that small businesses employ nearly half of all Nova Scotians, and that's just small business. This legislation puts futures at risk. The future of thousands of businesses, the futures of hundreds of thousands of Nova Scotians, and collectively, the future of our entire economy. And we all know that our economy can't take much more. We already have a fragile business environment in Nova Scotia, and the NDP have proven they only know how to make matters worse, not better. From one end of this province to the other, we've seen job losses and businesses close. Madam Speaker, we're on shaky ground. Far too shaky to consider a policy as risky as first contract arbitration. Madam Speaker, under the NDP, a staggering 8,400 Nova Scotians have already been forced to leave the workplace. This government is kidding itself if they think it's the right time to pursue further job-killing policies. The government has proven two things. For one thing, they're not very good at creating jobs. But on the other hand, they're very good at losing them. And with the first contract arbitration, they're about to see us lose a whole lot more. If you don't believe me, Madam Speaker, the members, government, all they have to do is just speak to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business or the Retail Council of Canada to see what they might have to say about it. Now, Madam Speaker, they tell us the famous words, that just isn't true. How many times have we heard from across the floor that just isn't true?
Too many.
Simply not true. It just isn't true. That's not true. But that's all we've been hearing, Madam Speaker. They tell us that first contract legislation will not result in job losses. But how can we trust them, Madam Speaker? We know we can't trust this government to handle the economy. They've proven that with the job losses, they've proven it with job losses, but we know we can't trust them to keep their word either. After all, this is the group that told us they wouldn't raise taxes. What happened? So, I guess it's simply not true. They didn't raise taxes. It's all an imagination. There's something wrong with us. All of a sudden we're seeing that taxes have gone up, but it's all in our imagination. It's simply not true. Well, tell every Nova Scotian that's paying an extra 2% on their tax, their HST every year, that it's not simply true. Tell them. Is anybody going to stand up and say, it's not true? It's not true. I know the Minister of Finance wants to stand up. He'll have his chance. He'll have his hour. He can ramble on about the wonderful things but that Finance Minister, Madam Speaker, is the one that raised their taxes 2%. It was him that did. Let him answer to the people of Nova Scotia.
Simply true. You'll have your time.
Madam Speaker,
Let him have his say.
Order. Order, please. I'm going to rule that one unparliamentary. I would ask that the member retract that statement. That would be I recognize. Maybe take your seat, please. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
I withdraw my remark.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
I withdraw my remark.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Member for Victoria the Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Minister of Justice. But I guess when you listen to the remarks that are coming across the floor, the truth hurts. We're touching a nerve here. Now I'll ask my place, Madam Speaker, because that was so interesting.
Start over again. Start over.
I found it. The words were, they told us they wouldn't raise taxes, but they did. I think that's where I left off. So, Madam Speaker, when this government tells us first contract imposition won't result in job losses in Nova Scotia, how can we trust them? How can we trust them? Their word is good. Think about it. One of the key responsibilities, Madam Speaker, a government has is to build a strong business environment and attract jobs to this province. Well, we have evidence that to date this government has failed to do so. And this legislation only confirms they'll continue to fail well into the future. Madam Speaker, our leader said it yesterday. All this legislation does is send up a big red flag for businesses looking to settle in Nova Scotia. The legislation says one thing and one thing only. Don't set up shop here. Nova Scotia is too risky. How backwards is that? At a time when our province needs to be doing everything it can to strengthen our economy and creating jobs, this government is intent in driving them away by introducing first contract arbitration. Madam Speaker, introducing this piece of legislation also says a lot about their priorities. At a time when the top priority for each and every member of this House should be on creating jobs, the government decided their top priority is to bring forward misguided, job-killing legislation. Not only that, but no one even asked for it. It's become evident, Madam Speaker, that the NDP priorities are not Nova Scotia priorities. Ask the folks at Newpage what their priorities are. Ask the people at Yarmouth what their priorities are. Ask the employees at Bowater what their priorities are. I can guarantee you one thing, None of them will say it's first contract arbitration. They'll say jobs and policies that protect jobs are their #1 concern, not risky laws that kill jobs. Our pulp and paper mills are in distress. Michelin is seriously considering ceasing to make investments in this province. Do we really want to see how these companies, indeed these whole industries, will react to something as dangerous as first contract arbitration? Do we? And I also, Madam Speaker, take issue with the title of this bill. The title is this: An Act to Prevent Unnecessary Labor Disruptions and Protect the Economy. Protect the economy? This government has failed to give any explanation of how this legislation will protect the economy. And Madam Speaker, if this bill is really designed to protect the economy, where are the business owners and operators, the backbone of this economy? Where are they lined up? Where are they? If they should, if it's going to protect the economy, they should be here in droves. Where are they? They know better. Madam Speaker, if this government was really concerned with, they'd say to the business community, okay, we get it. We understand how this is going to be bad for you and bad for your employees. Now, let's sit down and work out a better arrangement. That's what the government should do. However, we all know they're not going to do that. They didn't do it during Bill 100, so why should we expect them to do it now? It's not going to happen. Instead, they're going to bull ahead with their adversarial approach to business in this province. And they behave like that because they simply don't care. They don't care whether businesses in Nova Scotia succeed or fail. They're not interested in the public interest. They're only interested in their own special interest friends. That, Madam Speaker, is the NDP way. That is the NDP way. They have no respect for the rights of businesses in the province. They have no respect, Madam Speaker, for the businesses in this province. That's a huge part of what this legislation is about. Taking away the rights of businesses to say no to agreements that would see them suffer or possibly forced to close up shop. That's what they're doing. Madam Speaker, I know one thing. With a lot of the remarks that are coming from across the floor, it's going to be interesting that I hope that all these members will be standing up talking for an hour so their constituents can hear them say the wonderful things about first contract arbitration. Looking forward to it. And if it means that we're here over Christmas holidays so that they can do it, I'll be here. Madam Speaker, this legislation creates uncertainty for job creators in this province. Because of it, they will not be able to be fully aware of what kind of business they can run. Businesses coming to Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker, or even businesses currently in Nova Scotia, may not know how many employees they're able to hire, what they're able to pay them, what the hours of operation will be, and I could go on and on.
Please do. Please do.
All it does is create more and more question marks and provides no answers. This is a common theme again. Questions go across the floor, but we never get answers, Madam Speaker. Perhaps one of the worst aspects of the government's misguided decision to introduce this legislation now is that this is the fact that it couldn't have come at a worse time in the economy of Nova Scotia. Gets back to my opening remarks. Why? Why now? What's the big rush in this whole thing? Our economy needs a revamp, not a decline. Nova Scotia is presented, Madam Speaker, with an historic opportunity. The new shipbuilding contract in Halifax is a source of great optimism for our province, as it should be. That happened because of the good business practices of Irving Oil, and thank you, Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Madam Speaker, the shipbuilding project it was based on merit, that's right. But in order for somebody to pay for it, some government has to put up the money, and guess, thank you, Stephen Harper. That's right. Nobody is going to argue, Madam Speaker, where the best workforce is. The best workforce is in Nova Scotia. The best business person to do business for the shipbuilding is Irving Shipbuilders. We know it. It was a merit-based opportunity. Irving won it on their merit with their workforce, and we know that. Again, it could mean thousands of jobs for Nova Scotians. Thousands. It could mean young Nova Scotians who've left home for greener pastures will be able to come home. And it should mean that there'll be an abundance of opportunities for new businesses here in Nova Scotia. Businesses that will employ people from all corners of this province. Yes, Madam Speaker, the future should be bright for Nova Scotia. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, with first contract arbitration, the NDP run the risk of blowing it. Imagine an entrepreneur wanting to set up business in Nova Scotia in order to take advantage of what's going to be happening with the shipbuilding. He or she comes in, then they discover that thanks to first contract arbitration, a third party who likely knows nothing about their business or industry may be able to step in and set all the wages and benefits of the employees. All aspects of the relationship with their employees could potentially be determined by someone else. Someone else. Suddenly, Nova Scotia is looking a lot more risky. Madam Speaker, this shipbuilding opportunity presents an opportunity for not only us, but for the next generation of young people in Nova Scotia as well. We have young people who are only in school now, and they know that when they finish their education, if they work hard and follow the right path, they too will be able to find meaningful work related to the shipbuilding contract here at home. But, Madam Speaker, the NDP are letting them down with the first contract arbitration. First contract arbitration or imposition means that great day, those great opportunities suddenly seem a lot further away than we had hoped. The stakes are high, Madam Speaker, with this shipbuilding contract. We have to get this right. We have a responsibility to make sure the generations to come will be able to take full advantage of all of the spin-offs that will accompany this decision. Madam Speaker, the NDP are throwing all of that in doubt with first contract imposition. It's not like we have a lot of time to waste. We have to start laying the groundwork for this new opportunity now. And with the government putting forward first contract arbitration, that job just got a lot harder. Because we also have to sell Nova Scotia. We need to remember that all of us here in this House, regardless of where we sit, are ambassadors for Nova Scotia. We're also be responsible for trying to improve our province's reputation across this great country and around the globe. Suddenly, Madam Speaker, trying to tell people Nova Scotia is open for business and that they should invest here is going to get a lot harder. We're about to hear a lot of people saying, I love Nova Scotia, or I'd love to invest in Nova Scotia, or Nova Scotia is my home and I'd like to come back, but I can't because of the NDP's mishandling of the economy and because of first contract arbitration. But it's not like the problem is simply that it'll be harder to bring new businesses to Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker. It's deeper than that. We're an aging population, and if anyone should know in this House, I should. There's a demographic crisis looming in Nova Scotia. In the decades to come, we're going to need new, young Nova Scotians. We're going to need a younger, healthier, more productive population to help us grow our economy and to support our aging population. Madam Speaker, this may be the biggest challenge on the horizon for Nova Scotia, and this government has a responsibility to act on it. But what is their answer? Job-killing policies, like first contract arbitration, that will not bring new people to Nova Scotia, and in fact, may even drive some away. One of the most offensive aspects of this bill lies in the fact that it's so easy for the Labour Board or an arbitrator to intervene. According to the legislation, all that has to be done is to reach an impasse before the Labour Board can step in. What the legislation fails to define is the word impasse. What is an impasse? That's a very important question that this government must answer before they proceed. What is an impasse? There are just too many questions, Madam Speaker, that arise out of this. For example, at what point does a simple debate or disagreement turn into an impasse? At what point? We don't know. We have no definition of what the disagreement might be. When does it become an impasse? What classifies as an impasse? We haven't heard. Again, we don't know. So, Madam Speaker, this begs the question, why has this government, in bringing this legislation forward, failed to define impasse? Is this term left open intentionally? Think about it. Is this a way for their Labour Board to interfere in private negotiations with little or no reason? These are important questions, Madam Speaker, that this government has to answer. The reality, as has been mentioned by our leader yesterday and continues to say it today, this is the wrong legislation at the wrong time and for the wrong reasons. Madam Speaker, I want everyone to go back and think about the example I used about treats. I explained the situation of what happened to treats as a result of first contract arbitration. I asked the government members opposite to think about what it'll do to the small business in your area if there is first contract arbitration imposed. One of the biggest questions, I think, Madam Speaker, that comes forward as a result of discussions around first contract arbitration is unions' ability to go into a non-unionized workplace and to be able to sell themselves and ask their employees to become unionized. Because of first contract arbitration, a business that has refused over time to become unionized, the employees are saying, oh my goodness, this may not be such a bad thing, because we can be guaranteed if we don't get what we want, there'll be an arbitrator hired, or if we can't agree on an arbitrator, it'll go to the Labour Board. Well, Madam Speaker, I think that begs the question, who makes up the Labour Board? Who makes up the Labour Board? So I guess that would, and I'm going to go back, I keep referring, I had referenced earlier, Michelin. Michelin, union has tried to come in at least 3 times that I'm aware of, if not more, to set up shop. And in their wisdom, the employees at Michelin decided to continue as the way they were going. Now, Madam Speaker, the union has another bargaining tool to come in to make it more attractive for employees at places like Michelin to say, look what we have to offer you. Look what we have to offer you. You can join a union. And if you have concerns about benefits or wages, don't worry about it. It'll go to first contract arbitration. There'll be an arbitrator hired, hopefully, but if your employer doesn't agree with it, it'll go to the Labour Board, and we know who makes up the Labour Board. So isn't that attractive to the employees? Well, at that point, Madam Speaker, that's when Michelin's tires hit the road. And they'll be going in the wrong direction. Right. They'll be leaving this province, Madam Speaker. They will be leaving this province. Many other businesses will be leaving this province. Madam Speaker, I can't wait because as the member from Yarmouth was up, and in my time up here, the member from Guysborough Sheet Harbour has been quite vocal with his feelings. So again, I look forward to him spending his hour to talk about the wonderful things that are going to happen in Guysborough Sheet Harbour to the businesses there should they become unionized. Can't wait for it. I'm sure members on this side can't wait for it either.
It'll be a short speech.
Madam Speaker, we probably won't see too many get up to speak of the wonders of this act because they all have someone to answer to at home. They have someone to answer to at home. I know I do. And not only my own home, but in the whole constituency of Victoria the Lakes. I mentioned before, not one person, not one single person, not one business has come to me and said, my God, we need first contract arbitration. That's it. That's the only way this province is going to move forward. Not one person. We've discussed this at caucus at length numerous times. I haven't heard one caucus member in our caucus say, come on, we have to support the government on this. This is what our people want us to do, support the government. I didn't hear it. I can't speak for the Liberal caucus, but I think we heard from the member from Yarmouth what their feelings are about the whole thing, Madam Speaker. So there has to be a lot of soul searching, and I think that's the best way to put it. Soul searching by every single member across this floor. Remember who put you here. That's right. Remember who you're responsible to. You're responsible to your constituents, whether they're union or non-union, who need this province to be in strong economic position to move forward. First contract arbitration will not allow that to happen. just think, I'm trying to think of a business in Guysborough Sheet Harbour that I can reference to using this as an example, and I probably will later. That the honourable member could probably go to and ask, what do you think of first contract arbitration? Is that going to save you? Think about it. I can't wait. I can name lots of businesses in my constituency. I referenced a few of them today that would, if first contract arbitration was imposed, they wouldn't be here. They would not be here if they. Oh, Madam Speaker, I'm really liking the remarks because this is going. We're going to be here over Christmas, I know, because all these people across the floor that are talking now, I know will stand up for an hour when it comes their time. I can't wait. Just look at it. Count the number of days. Count the number of hours between now and New Year's. So maybe we can have Christmas celebrations here in this house. The tree will be up soon and we can all gather around for
Order, please. If I could remind the member to speak to the principles of the bill, not about Christmas. We have work to do. Order. Order. I would remind the member to speak to the principles of the bill. Thank you. And not Christmas.
Thank you, Madam
recognize
Speaker.
the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I made those references in response to some of the talk that was coming from across the floor as the principles were being spoken about. If we could call them principles.
Paying off your friends is not a principle.
Madam